Hey guys, long time no see. Hopefully you enjoyed the movie. It's what I call an undiscovered gem. It's a great movie that didn't do well at the theaters for some reason, but when I came on it, I thought it was just a really fantastically interesting film and one that kind of kept you at the edge of your seat. So, how many of you figured out what had actually happened early on first day? Anyone? No, I didn't either. And yet the clues are there consistently through the movie. Um, it's one of the things we'll talk about when we get into screenwriting, but they show you that kid over and over and over again. Little places here, little places there. So they're leading you to that. And there are little clues all the way through that this is where they should have been looking. And that the mom was, in fact, not helping, but trying to push people away from what actually happened. The worst case of this to me was when she was on the phone with the dad, and he's like, it's like she's another person. And the detective said, you know what, you just gave me an idea. I'll have to call you back. And then she went and created the fake ID to throw him off and make her think that his daughter has left. It was a special kind of evil. But anyway, it's time to take a look now at the sheets that you did and how many items you were able to pick out that kind of put this film in its era of 2017, 2018. Now, some of the things you wouldn't be able to know unless you did some research, like the fact that the film took 3 weeks to actually film, but over a year to edit because the technology wasn't as good as it needed to be, um, to make it look as if it were all on screens and such. So go ahead, pull your sheets out. I'll give you a second, and then I will go over a list of things that I noticed were in the film that put it pretty squarely in about 2017, 2018.
Welcome to my house. Morning comes and you know that you wanna stay. Close the blinds, let's pretend that the time has changed. Keep our clothes on the floor, open up champagne. Let's continue tonight, come on, celebrate. That's how we do. Sometimes you gotta stay in. And you know where I live. Yeah, you know what we is.
Hopefully you got your sheets out now. We're going to go over some of this stuff so you can, you know, think about how you would apply this then to your movie. Now, technology is always a good place to start, and the technology in this film was very, very typical for its era. The most obvious thing to start out was the phones that were used. They were iPhone 7s, and we're now well up into the teens. So the fact that the iPhone 7, which would have been the best phone at the time, was in use pins this pretty quickly and pretty easily into 2017. Um, a lot of the stuff you see in the beginning in the montage, like there's a jump scare video, which people don't really use anymore. You don't see them, but they were a huge phenomena at the time, um, you know, previous to this when the little girl was supposed to be growing up, and still a reference that people would have gotten pretty easily in 2017. There were also um, a bunch of pop up ads when they went to the wrong place, and then you had to buy Norton antivirus. And you don't really get those kind of ads popping up the way they did in the past, although obviously you still have problems where you can get a virus or infected. But those pop up ads were very, very typical for that era, and you had to buy and install Norton, actually physically, with a CD drive. Um, and the social media sites and blogs and chat rooms, which are very, very common now, were not then. So for people watching this, this would have been something kind of new, and they've since been replaced by other types of social media. But that's a good place to start. Another way that it really fits into its era is just the way they decided to tell the story. Like every scene is shown through a smartphone, through a computer screen. And it was very much like a movie that came out 3 years earlier called Unfriended, which came out in 2014. And this was an idea that was really novel at the time and hasn't really been replicated a lot since then. Um, but when it has been done, it's been much easier to do because the technology allows for it. Like I said, it took actually 13 days to shoot, but almost 2 years to edit because the technology hadn't caught up. Other things that cemented in that era from a technological point of view were Zoom call meetings, which became, as you remember, really, really huge and very commonplace during the pandemic, which was 2 years later, but at the time were still kind of selectively used. Also, another technology that pops its head up is when the one boy is talking to uh, the father and they're FaceTiming, which was relatively new. He's wearing wired earbuds. They still make those now, but they're rarely ever used, with most people using the wireless earbuds. Um, you also had a virtual memorial service towards the end when they think she's dead. And again, that's something that is a fairly new technology to be able to place a camera and then stream it to people who can't show up. Um, you know, small colleges do this now with different sporting events, and even some high schools will do it. And graduation ceremonies are streamed. Lots of things that before you had to be in person to see show up in the movie. Um, and they were just kind of starting out at that point. Another place you can look at things are what you can do online and what virtual services were utilized that wouldn't have been commonplace then, but are very commonplace now. One of the things, and it was on the quiz, the Kahoot you took last week, was when a girl mentioned that the daughter was on Tumblr a lot, and the father says, "What's a Tumblr?" He doesn't know. It was kind of new at the time. And there were other things like Venmo. He was confused by Venmo. His brother was and said, "You mean the payment service?" Which again is something that is very typically used now. Um, and then even little things like the media frenzy online, when people were like going nuts and calling him names and doing things, especially after they saw the kid at the movie theater, where you had people live streaming the event, and then it was recorded and kept for later. Again, all kind of new things 9, 10 years ago, but very common now. So these are other things that place it in its era.
Sometimes you gotta stay. Welcome to my house.
Okay, and last few kind of things is you can look at are cultural and sociological. These are things that you might not have the perspective on, but you could certainly ask someone who was around. Um, you know, One cultural reference that was played for a joke was the Justin Bieber concert. And remember, back in 2018, he was still more of a child performer than an adult, so it's not something that typically a guy would have wanted people to know that he was doing. Um, if you noticed at the very end, the name of the high school she attended, the mascot was a catfish. And back then there was a show called Catfish, which talked about, how people would hide their identity online to try and draw other people in. First it was a movie, then it became a TV show. And this is a common term right now. And this is actually what the one character was doing. He was catfishing the girl. And that became kind of a social phenomena. And it was kind of hitting its peak at that point. So they played on that joke, understanding that people would get the reference. And even the technology where the father takes the picture of the fish and chips girl who supposedly she's talking to and reverse engineers it, to do a image search. That was a technology that was really first showcased on the show Catfish. That's how a lot of people learned how to use it, and it worked. One of the things that may have not seemed from a cultural point of view like a big deal, and certainly would be now, is that the main characters, the father and the daughter and the brother, are all Asian, and no mention is ever made of it. Not that it needs to be, but in earlier movies, if there are Asian characters, a lot of times it was accompanied by stereotypes. You didn't typically have movies um, in the late 20th century, the early 21st century, where if a character was Asian, there wasn't some kind of mention made or some kind of joke attached to it. You're going to watch another movie after this one called Cellular, and there's only one Asian character, and it's played for jokes, and you'll recognize it when you see it. So these are all things that kind of stand out. So make sure you filled in some details on the sheets. Make sure you put your name on it and hand it into the sub, because you will get credit for this.
Baby, take control now. We can't even slow down. We don't have to go a while.